So, Cath, thank you very much for coming to talk to me about a little bit about your career and about your background and then your link to business. And it's a bit of an unusual career, if I may say so. Can you give a bit of background, sort of how you get to where you are now? What was your your development?
So essentially I studied languages and international politics, and I always wanted to go into the diplomatic world, where I did get to. But before I got into that, I went on this wonderful journey for 10 to 15 years of trying to make a boat go backwards as fast as possible. So I took up rowing at university, and it's fair to say it sort of took over my life for the next period, such that I left university and went on to row in the Great Britain Olympic team, went to 3 Olympic Games, and it was only towards the end of that I then sort of reconnected back in with, what I'd studied, what I'd learned, and set off on the diplomatic career. So in a way, they seem like quite different careers, but they were actually about people under pressure, people in high stakes environments, very different environments, a very clear-cut sporting environment and a very messy diplomatic environment. But all the same, I found myself working in teams under a lot of pressure. And for me, the interesting thing has been really kind of understanding both those experiences, both those environments, and what were the things that help people to perform under really challenging circumstances. And so now my work in leadership, in performance, is really making sense of those experiences and adding that into the background of research around how we can be our best selves when it really matters.
So you're advising companies or businesses, or what is your current role?
So I do a mixture of work. I suppose I'm a consultant, it's probably the catch-all term, but it's a mixture of work, working with exec teams, facilitating, leading leadership programs, coming in, perhaps working on culture change programs to accompany change or a desire to raise performance. So within that field, really, all of those elements, very people-based, very behavioural-based, if you like, so organisational behaviour rather than organisational structures, and really trying to get at that essence of, how can we help people to bridge that gap between where they're operating and what they're capable of. And that's the bit I'm really interested in.
So it's interesting that you come actually not from a business route into that. How did you find entering the world of business with not necessarily the sort of the knowledge and the experience of working in an industry?
I think often organisations like the outside lens, like a sense of some different perspectives into their world. And it's still actually about people under pressure trying to deliver their best. So the analogies, the commonalities are very clear, and I think often some of my experiences allow me to put things in a kind of almost more dramatic scenario. If you think of a rowing crew about to row their Olympic final, or actually a negotiating team trying to stabilise a conflict situation through negotiation. These are key team situations that people can really relate to and imagine, haven't themselves experienced, and yet can draw a lot from it about actually the pressure they're under and how they can become their best and how they can draw on some of that. So I think it provides some really useful analogies that people can relate to and then take back into their own context.
So there seems to be a pattern in different industries that we all sort of try to work within a sort of high pressure environment and to achieve a certain goal together. It doesn't really matter where you're coming from. Is that sort of how you see it as well?
Well, I think often when I'm coming into an organisation, it's about actually clarifying that goal is the first step. And again, it's taking some of those high performance principles from the sporting world where you have real clarity on what you're trying to achieve, and it's made very specific, and it's clarity not just about the way you want to row, what the aim is, but also about how you want to behave in that environment. So there's clarity on lots of different levels that exists in a high performance sporting environment. And often what I'm working with companies to do is to try and map across where they've got less clarity, or where a leadership team think it's clear in their own minds, but what does it mean for the individual? What does it mean for each team? That's much less clear. And so I spend quite a lot of time doing that translation piece, if you like. How clear are things really? And of course, we know from the communication challenges that exist in every organisation that you cannot be too clear about what you're doing. You cannot re-clarify enough, make it relevant to each team, to each person within that. So a lot of it is really that kind of work, and we start off on actually saying, how clear are we about the goal? And why do we want that goal? Why does that goal matter? Again, setting up some real basics that often people make assumptions about. And once you start making an assumption in an organisation, well, everybody's thinking differently.
Yeah.
And you don't get that real kind of effort harmonised in the right direction.
It's interesting to compare it to rowing because you're literally sitting in the same boat, so you can't actually, do anything else, and you have to have the same goal in mind and really understand that clarity as well. So, what do you think are the barriers that businesses don't have that is a struggle, that sitting in the same boat doesn't work out as well?
So I think people are often less explicit about what they're trying to achieve. And again, in that high performance environment, you don't leave things to doubt or to assumption. And you say, in a way, with that analogy, let's think about that in a bit more detail. You're in the same boat, but you're probably in the same boat for different reasons. So again, we don't make assumptions that everyone wants to win and therefore we're all in the same place. We really start to dig under, why does it matter to you to win? And that will change throughout your rowing career. What is it that you bring to the crew? What are your strengths? What are your unique strengths? How do you behave under pressure? How do we get the best out of you? Again, not assuming that you can manage pressure, because I don't want to find out in a race that you can't. So often it is just being really explicit about what it is you want to achieve and how you're going to work together to do that. I mean, in a rowing boat, you're sitting in the same boat, and yet you're not actually physically linked. Your oars aren't linked. You've got to work together, but you've got to still sense what people are doing around you, sense that environment of the water, and start to kind of work out how people are moving around you. And again, I think, looking at the analogy in a work context, people are put in a team, they're called a team, and they're put on a chart, an organogram, but actually it only starts to become a team when you start to work out what people are doing around you and what they bring and who they are and what gets them up in the morning and what drives them on the difficult days and what you've got in common and how you can build on that. So for me, I take a lot of these analogies across where we just don't let things... but you cannot afford to leave them to assume that people understand or to assume that people are on the same track. And to assume that everybody's motivated for the same reason. Of course we're not. So there are so many different things there that I find in organisations people aren't explicit about. And they therefore don't bring their whole selves, because nobody's asked them why they get up in the morning and actually why they're doing the job. We often have a very sort of professional sense that can leave the best of who we are at the door when we enter the organisation. And well, that's not enough if we want high performance levels. We want people to really sustain high performance under pressure. We've got to allow people to be their whole selves, to bring that to work. I often work with organisations to look at both how the organisational objectives and personal objectives cross over. And in my world, you need to have both of those to perform. And we spend a lot of time in organisations talking about the organisation's objectives, but we don't talk about the individual objectives to the same degree. And if you don't have both of those things connecting, then you're automatically kind of, killing off a level of performance, if you like, a level of engagement. So many organisations talking about engagement challenges, productivity challenges, and yet they don't allow people to really bring who they are into the workplace.